To understand the scale of what was lost, you have to understand what Barings was. In 1803, when Thomas Jefferson wanted to buy the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon and double the size of America, he did not have the money. Barings did. They underwrote the deal $15 million in 1803, roughly 1/3 of $1 trillion in today's terms. They financed the reparations France paid Britain after Waterloo. They banked the Duke of Wellington. By the 1990s, the Duc de Cambridge, Prince Charles, and Queen Elizabeth all kept accounts there. In the city of London, Barings was not a bank. It was an institution, the sixth oldest merchant bank in the world, described by one French minister 2 centuries earlier as the sixth great power in Europe. It survived 2 world wars. It survived the Great Depression. It survived the 1974 secondary banking crisis that took down dozens of its competitors. It was, in every practical sense, considered indestructible. Now picture the man who destroyed it. Nick Leeson was born in Watford, England in 1967, the son of a plasterer. He left school at 18 with a handful of qualifications, none of them in finance. He got a job as a bank clerk at Coutts, then moved to Morgan Stanley in the back office, the settlements desk, the unglamorous plumbing of high finance. In 1989, he joined Barings. 3 years later, at just 25 years old, he was sent to Singapore to manage the bank's operations on the SIMEX, the Singapore International Monetary Exchange. And here is the detail everyone missed. Leeson was given a job no serious bank would ever allow. He was at the same time the head of trading on the floor and the head of the back office that settled his own trades. He signed off on his own transactions. He was the referee and the striker in the same match. That was the crack. And within weeks, the money started leaking through it. The number 8 is considered lucky in Chinese culture. 5 8s in a row is luckier still. In July of 1992, Nick Leeson opened a Barings error account and gave it the number 88,888. On paper, it was meant to be a routine holding pen, a place to park small trading mistakes until they could be corrected. In reality, it became the largest hidden black hole in banking history. The first loss was tiny. One of Leeson's junior traders, a young woman named Kim, sold 20 futures contracts when she should have bought them. The mistake cost £20,000. Leeson could have flagged it and moved on. Instead, he shoved it into account 88,888 and told himself he would trade his way back to even. He did not. The next month, he lost more and more. By the end of 1992, account 88,888 was down £2 million. By the end of 1993, it was 23 million. By the end of 1994, 208 million. And here is where the story turns from a mistake into a fraud, because Leeson was not just hiding losses, he was doubling down on them. To recover, he began writing something called a short straddle on the Nikkei 225, a bet, essentially, that the Japanese stock market would stay calm. If Tokyo did nothing, Leeson collected the premium and buried the losses under it. Meanwhile, back in London, Barings actually thought Leeson was a genius. His fake profits made him look like the golden boy of the entire bank. In 1993, his reported earnings were 10% of Barings' total group profit. In 1994, his bonus alone was $720,000. If this is gripping you, save this video, because what happens next is the part I want you to remember. You will want to come back to this one. Now remember that seed I planted at the start. The phone call that exposed everything. We will get to it, but first you need to know about the earthquake. At 5:46 a.m. on January 17, 1995, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck the Japanese port city of Kobe. 6,400 people died. The Nikkei, which Leeson had bet would stay calm, cratered. In 1 week, Leeson's hidden losses doubled. And instead of surrendering, he did something that historians of finance still cannot quite believe. He tripled his bet. Over the next 4 weeks, Nick Leeson bought more Nikkei futures than any single trader in the history of the exchange, $20 billion in exposure, on a bank with a capital base of only $615 million. By February 23, 1995, the walls were closing in. Barings' internal auditors had spotted a $100 million hole and had started asking Singapore for reconciliation. Leeson forged documents. He faked a fax from a client named Richard Hogan of the firm Spear, Leeds and Kellogg, confirming a phantom $78 million transaction, a transaction that had never happened. When the auditors asked to speak to Hogan directly, Leeson stalled. That evening, a Thursday, Leeson walked out of the Barings office in Singapore, went home, packed a bag with his wife Lisa, and disappeared. On his desk, he left a 2-word note: "I'm sorry." The next morning, February 24, the Singapore office opened without him. The truth unraveled inside of 6 hours. When the losses in account 88,888 were finally added up, they came to £827 million, approximately $1.4 billion. Barings' entire capital, twice over. The bank was, in the language of the city, technically insolvent by the time the London markets opened. Peter Baring, the chairman, called the Bank of England on Sunday, February 26. Governor Eddie George cut short a skiing holiday in the French Alps and flew back to London to try to organize a rescue. Through the night, teams from Barclays, HSBC, and NatWest went through Baring's books. By dawn, they all reached the same conclusion. The exposure on the Nikkei was still open. If Tokyo opened lower on Monday, the losses could double again. No British bank would touch it. At 10 p.m. on Sunday night, Barings was placed into administration. 233 years of banking ended in a single weekend. On March 5, the Dutch financial group ING bought the entire firm, its offices, its brand, its liabilities, everything, for one symbolic pound. 1,200 employees kept their jobs. But the shareholders, many of them descendants of the original Baring family, whose ancestors had bankrolled empires, were wiped out. They lost every penny. Total investor losses, roughly $1 billion. Meanwhile, Nick Leeson had flown from Kuala Lumpur to Brunei to Frankfurt, trying to reach London. He was arrested at Frankfurt Airport on March 2, spotted by German police who had been tipped off by an Interpol red notice. He fought extradition for 9 months before being flown to Singapore in chains. On December 2, 1995, Nick Leeson pleaded guilty in a Singapore court to 2 counts of forging documents and cheating the exchange. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi Prison, one of the toughest prisons in Southeast Asia. His wife Lisa divorced him within the year. She would later remarry a fellow Barings trader. While Leeson was in Changi, an official inquiry was launched by the Bank of England. The report, delivered in July 1995, was devastating not just for Leeson but for Barings itself. It found that senior management in London had received warning after warning from internal auditors, from external consultants, even from the SIMEX exchange itself, and had ignored every single one. As early as August 1994, an internal audit had flagged the exact conflict of interest that would later kill the bank, Leeson controlling both the front and back office. The recommendation was to separate the roles immediately. It was never acted on. Peter Baring himself, when questioned, admitted that senior management had barely understood what Leeson was doing. He had told a colleague only months earlier that trading securities was not actually very difficult. 12 directors of Barings were banned or resigned. No one else went to prison. Not a single London executive spent a single day behind bars. And now the twist. Because in 1998, Nick Leeson was released early from Changi after only 3.5 years when he was diagnosed with colon cancer, the same disease that had killed his mother. Sent back to England to die, he did the opposite. He recovered. He wrote a best-selling memoir called Rogue Trader, which was made into a 1999 film starring Ewan McGregor. He remarried, had children, and moved to Ireland. And then, in a detail that reads like fiction, Nick Leeson, the man who destroyed a 233-year-old bank, became the chief executive officer of an Irish football club, Galway United, in 2005. He gave lectures at business schools on risk management. He charged $100,000 a speech. Today, he runs a company that helps corporations detect and prevent, of all things, internal fraud. The man who blew a $1.4 billion hole in the world's oldest merchant bank is now paid, quite handsomely, to teach other companies how to spot the next Nick Leeson. The Barings name did not fully die. ING kept it alive as Baring Asset Management until 2016, when it was quietly folded into MassMutual's American subsidiary. The last traces of the bank that outlived Napoleon and 2 world wars vanished from the London Stock Exchange without a single headline. CTA 1213 Min. If this story hit you the way it hits me every time I read the Bank of England report, do me one favor. Subscribe to WealthLogic and hit the bell icon. A new true money story every week, corporate collapses, financial cons, and the deals that changed history. And drop a comment. If you had been Peter Baring and Nick Leeson's numbers were making you rich, would you have asked the hard question or would you have looked the other way? I want to hear it. Outro 1315 Min. There is one lesson from the fall of Barings, and it is not about a rogue trader. Nick Leeson was not the disease, he was the symptom. The disease was a 233-year-old institution that had grown so proud, so certain of its own reputation, that it stopped asking its own star performer a single serious question. Every bank collapse in modern history, Enron, Lehman, Wirecard, Credit Suisse, shares the same quiet root. Someone was making too much money too easily, and no one wanted to be the person who slowed him down. The number 88,888 was hidden in plain sight for 3 years, on internal Barings reports, printed on paper, sitting on desks in London. Nobody read it, because nobody wanted to. If this one gripped you, my next video is on the trader who did to Societe Generale in 2008 what Leeson did to Barings in 1995, but with almost 5 times the losses, and a French bank that somehow survived. His name is Jerome Kerviel. And you will not believe how he did it. See you there. In 1995, a 28-year-old trader named Nick Leeson destroyed Barings Bank, a 233-year-old British institution that had financed the Louisiana Purchase, banked Queen Elizabeth II, and survived 2 world wars. Sitting in a Singapore office, Leeson hid $1.4 billion in losses inside a secret account numbered 88,888 for 3 straight years. When the Kobe earthquake struck Japan on January 17, 1995, his hidden bets on the Nikkei 225 collapsed. Within a week, Barings was insolvent. On March 5, 1995, the Dutch bank ING bought the entire firm, offices, staff, and centuries of history for one symbolic pound. This is the full story of how one man with no university degree fooled the smartest bankers in Europe, how Peter Barings' boardroom ignored years of warnings, and why Leeson's post-prison second act is more surreal than the collapse itself. 0000 Hook, a bank older than America 00. 45 the empire of the Baring family 03. 00 account 88,888.06. 00 the Kobe earthquake 09. 00 the £1 sale 12. 00 where Nick Leeson is today Barings Bank. Nick Leeson financial history true story WealthLogic.